Hey guys, welcome back. Please hit the like button as you walk on in. We are going to be talking about the 6 most interesting things from the new lawsuit Stephen Belafonte has filed against his ex-wife, Mel B, also known as Scary Spice from the Spice Girls. So according to Belafonte, this lawsuit stems from a decade-long campaign by Mel B to cause him severe emotional distress and tarnish his reputation. He claims she falsely accused him of numerous crimes and abuses, ranging from physical violence to financial abuse, to felony gun ownership, to kidnapping, to extortion, and cruel and malevolent behavior. If you want an in-depth dive on the full complaint, I've done a reading already on my channel and I'll link it in the description below, but this one's going to round up 6 really interesting things from this complaint. Now, the first thing I think is really interesting is that Mel B seems to reason that she must be telling the truth because nobody sued her. The complaint includes this quote, and it says, "In recent statements to the media, defendant has told the world, I'm telling the truth because Mr. Belafonte has never sued me." Now, the logic of equating the absence of a lawsuit to inherent truthfulness is not something that I personally buy into. It sounded weird to me when I read it. And what makes it even more interesting is that Mel B has faced several lawsuits already, including lawsuits that alleged defamation. For example, in 2017, their former nanny, the couple's former nanny, Lorraine Gilles, sued for defamation, and she only sued Mel B. And while this video is about a sort of he said, she said between Stephen Belafonte and Mel B, the Sun broke down based on the declaration from Lorraine Gilles, the she said, she said. So Mel said that Stephen made Lorraine a pretty young rival to undermine me, but Lorraine said, I was having sex with Mel for 7 years. Mel said, Stephen forced me to have threesomes. Lorraine said, we had threesomes when Mel invited Stephen into the bedroom. Mel said Stephen secretly filmed threesomes in a bid to blackmail me, talking about Stephen blackmailing her. Lorraine said Mel was the one who filmed our liaisons. Mel said Stephen was having sex with Lorraine. Lorraine said, I never had sex with Stephen without Mel there. Mel said Stephen got Lorraine pregnant and forced her to have an abortion. Lorraine said, I got pregnant from a one-night stand. Mel said Stephen paid Lorraine $300,000 for nanny services over 3 years. Lorraine said, there is no evidence of this. I was paid on a salary basis. Mel said, in January 2015, I fired Lorraine, but was forced to rehire her by Stephen. Lorraine said, I left in 2014. I was rehired in January at Mel's request. And then in 2019, it was reported that Mel agreed to pay Lorraine £1.8 million to avoid going to trial in the defamation suit that the nanny had filed. But sometime after that, according to a source that spoke with The Sun, there ended up being a stay-away order put in place to make sure Lorraine was kept away from Mel and her daughters. So it's unclear exactly what happened there, and it's also worth noting that with a settlement, the person has weighed the pros and cons of taking it to trial. It's not necessarily an admission of liability. We don't know the terms, I don't have it in front of me to see what the settlement includes, but that is a pretty hefty sum, if you ask me. £1.8 million. So she also faced another lawsuit that wasn't necessarily involving a claim of defamation, but it did include something that was false presentation of information in order to obtain prescription pills. Gary Madatyan, 40, developed a close friendship with Mel B after meeting the star while working as a hair and wardrobe stylist in 2017. In this lawsuit that was filed in September of 2019, he accused Mel B of abuse as well as stealing and failing to pay him back for $200,000. He claimed that Mel's psychiatrist, Dr. Charles Sophie, pressured him to lie to help sway her custody battle with her ex-husband, Stephen Belafonte. Dr. Sophie is also accused of illegally prescribing amphetamine salts to Mel using Madatyan's name without his consent. Gary also claims that Mel preyed on his empathy and his desire to get her healthy, and expanded his role so he was at her beck and call. And while we're not going to do a deep dive into this specific lawsuit or the other one that we just mentioned with the nanny, maybe we'll do a separate video on that another time, but it's really interesting that people are alleging that she asked them to lie or said that she was lying about them and what have you. And we only looked at 2 examples of lawsuits that were filed against her. But on the flip side, Mel B keeps saying this weird, interesting phrase about how the things she's saying must be true or they must be fact because she hasn't been sued.
The X Factor accountant that saw my money go into my account, then he took it out of my account. So this book isn't a he said, she said. It's actually fact. Hence, I haven't been sued for the book, and it's been out quite some time.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that logic? Do you think that that's a good statement to make? Do you think it supports the idea that what someone's saying is true just because they haven't been sued by somebody? The next thing I want to talk about from the complaint is Belafonte coming after claims that Mel B had made involving family and custody issues and allegations that he did certain things that would put the children in harm's way. And by the way, I'm going to do a reading of the TRO. It's 20 pages. This was filed in 2017, but I will do a reading of it. So if you want to see that, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell, and we'll do it sometime this week. This TRO, which, when you're filing something in the court, you can be protected from defamation in a way. You have some type of litigation privilege because you're making it as part of a court filing. Belafonte's complaint notes that Melanie took her claims to unprecedented heights in filing this TRO declaration. She falsely charged Mr. Belafonte with, among other things, brutal domestic violence, felony gun ownership, kidnapping, extortion, financial abuse, and cruel and malevolent behavior. And there was so much to unpack with this part of the complaint, so I highly recommend if you want to look at it more, check out the deep dive video there. But what's interesting is, when all was said and done, Mel B was actually ordered to pay Belafonte's legal fees at the end of the divorce proceedings, to the tune of $470,000. He also ended up winning full custody, so it doesn't seem that this court believed that Mr. Belafonte was a harm to the children. And they made this decision after, because of the temporary restraining order had been granted while the court worked everything out, the kids were actually under the physical custody of the mom during that duration of time. But even with that being said, once they looked at everything and made their final judgment, full custody was awarded to dad. One other thing that Mel B has said in more than one place, she says it in her book, and I believe the Steve Harvey Show was another place that she said it, but she described this pattern of coercive control that she alleges Stephen Belafonte engaged in that affected the children, one of them being that the kids were not allowed to eat at the table when it was time for dinner or meals with the family. And while it's only one photo, Stephen Belafonte is providing something that's kind of like, what do you mean? So if this wasn't the case, it's an interesting detail to insert somewhere, if you ask me. Now, going back to this back and forth about, family battles, custody battles, it would have been one thing if Mel B was just like, look, I travel a lot for work. It would be fine if he gets full custody. But Stephen Belafonte had to fight for custody because she had been filing this TRO to keep him away from not just herself, but also the kids. In the complaint, it says, notwithstanding Miss Brown's efforts to brand Mr. Belafonte a violent spouse and unfit father, labeling him as a monster and an abuser, Mr. Belafonte has had primary custody of MB, their shared daughter, since 2019. During this time, Miss Brown has barely maintained a relationship with MB, visiting her in the United States only once during the past 4 years, even though she has flown to the United States for work-related appearances and tapings on multiple occasions to appear on America's Got Talent in Los Angeles, talk shows in New York City, and a television show in Utah. Moreover, and the receipts for this are attached, we go over in the deep dive video, but Miss Brown frequently rejects to practice the daily court-ordered telephone calls to MB for multiple days at a time, having accepted only 15 of MB's 30 calls in the past month. So they attach that as Exhibit 1 down here, and it's records from a co-parenting app showing Miss Brown's frequent rejection of MB's calls. And furthermore, even though Mel B has alleged that Stephen Belafonte exposed the kids to lewd pornographic images, we've got from Rusty Updefraf, a male nanny that worked for Mel B. He made what's being described as explosive claims about what went on behind closed doors at Mel B's household as he cared for her daughters, including Madison, 7, and Angel. Mel B also has a 19-year-old daughter, Phoenix. Speaking to the Daily Mail, Updefraf alleged that Mel B would bring a rotation of men home. This is going to be relevant later for a separate reason. The children want to know why there's a naked man in Mommy's room or who that guy in the kitchen with his shirt off was. I tried to answer the questions the best I could. There was like 3 guys in a day, and I'm talking 5-hour sessions with each one because the guy goes, I talk to the guys and they're like, I can't go anymore. And then another guy would come in and another guy. Updefraf claimed there were men coming over to her house at all hours. Updefraf gave a dramatic deposition filed in court on August 31st during Mel B's divorce battle with ex-husband Stephen Belafonte. A judge subsequently ruled that Mel B had a booze and drug addiction and ordered her to undergo 4 months of regular medical tests, according to Daily Mail. That's the reason Updefraf says I did the job, because it was about the kids, not about her. Those girls love their mom and Melanie loves the girls, but Melanie desperately needs help. I want her to be clean and healthy because when she's healthy, she can be a great mom again. Now, this became relevant in the complaint because we have text messages from some third person in here describing the same thing, and Mel even mentions Rusty, whether he's there or not to currently watch the kids while she's pursuing sex adventures. And we're not going to read all of these, but I do read them in the deep dive video in full if you want to check them out there. You can laugh at me trying to read hilarious text messages. But here, some of it says, I'm going to have sex tonight, yes, with Mike. He came over last night, and as I put probably Madison to sleep in her bed, the bunk beds, I fell asleep with her and Mike after a couple drinks, with Rusty left. So he's coming over tonight with his dog. So what I thought was weird about this one in particular is she's saying, and she always writes like this, it's kind of hard to follow. And what I'm about to say, I mean this sincerely, is I can't tell for sure what I think is being said here. But based on what Rusty said on his own, what was reported in the Daily Mail, and then this text message from a third person, we're saying here with Mike, he came over last night, and as I put one of the kids to bed, to sleep in her bed, the bunk beds, I fell asleep with her and Mike after a couple of drinks. So is Mel saying that Mel also fell asleep in one of these bunk beds where the daughter's sleeping with Mike? I put M to sleep in her bed, the bunk beds. I fell asleep with her and Mike after a couple drinks with Rusty left. So maybe I'm reading this wrong. But this is weird when Rusty also says on the flip side that Mel's parading her sexual partners in front of the children. And then this text message, maybe it's not what it reads like to me. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. But to me, I just like, what is this positioning in this bunk bed? Because it's an and we fall asleep in these bunk beds. And I'm not here to knock sexual liberation of women, but I think this text is kind of odd. I think it's odd to parade certain things in front of your children if you want to set a good example. That's just my personal opinion. You're entitled to your own. I'm not necessarily saying that a man being shirtless in the kitchen is necessarily exposing someone to indecency. I'm not saying that. But what I do think is weird is if you've accused your ex-husband of exposing children to lewd imagery, and that's not true, that's one problem in and of itself. But if on the flip side, I'm sitting here scratching my head wondering what this bunk bed text means, and then I go and find another article that describes your live-in nanny feels like you used to parade your sexual activity in front of the children, it seems like maybe like projection. I don't know. That's just me. And then the last thing to note on this family and custody topic is on December 13th, 2022, as part of an ex parte order, Mel B was ordered not to expose or present herself naked in the daughter's presence, including but not limited to entering the daughter's bathtub, walking around her without underwear, or attempting to sleep in the same bed naked with the daughter. Point number 3 I want to talk about is the portrayal that Mel B is giving that when I left my ex, I couldn't even be touched. I was paranoid. I had nightmares. I couldn't actually feel safe with somebody. Here's an interview with Piers Morgan in 2019.
When I left my ex, I couldn't even be touched. I was terrified and paranoid. I'd wake up in nightmares and hot sweats. So for me to actually feel safe with somebody, let me just feel safe for a little bit, and then I'll tell you when I'm comfortable to talk about it.
And that's why I said those text messages would become interesting again, and what Rusty said is interesting because that was all happening in 2017 and 2018. So in the complaint, Stephen Belafonte pushes back against this idea that she couldn't even be touched. In fact, Miss Brown was dating at least one individual publicly in 2017 after having left Mr. Belafonte. So they link the September 2017 article from the Daily Mail as proof that they are out in public. She's out in public with one of the men that she's in and out with. But again, we've looked at some of these texts, and I go through all of them in that deep dive video, but they're talking to different people about the multiple sexual adventures multiple times a day with more than one partner while the kids are at the house, and possibly, I don't know what's going on with that bunk bed text. I really don't know how to interpret it. But some of these text messages say other stuff like, oh my god, shit, my kids just got home and my guy was still here. He just grabbed me and kissed me while it was electric, and then I sent him home. Then there's another one where she says, and I guess she calls someone smelly feet because there's multiple texts with this person, but she's texting her friend to let her know, or let them know, I'm so angry. Smelly feet took so long kissing me. He didn't make me come. Now, my other daughter has left the house, and I'm playing with, and it's blocked out. So my inference here is Smelly Feet was taking so long doing their business and still didn't do the thing that she wanted him to do. And then the daughter leaves, which the inference there would be the daughter was there up until some point during or after it already started. So this is a credibility hit, in my opinion. I don't know how I could reconcile what she's saying in a public interview and the way she's portraying what happened to her and how everything about her changed, how she couldn't be touched, she couldn't have close relationships or whatever. She seems like she was getting touched quite a lot in 2017 and 2018. It's not just like he's saying it. It's someone else. It's Rusty that's saying it. And it's her own text messages that are saying it. It's not just a claim that the ex-husband's making. So what basket do I put my credibility eggs in? And it's worth noting that while Mel is claiming post-abuse trauma in some of these interviews and speaking engagements, Stephen is saying he has suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder because of everything that's gone on with Mel B. He is frequently unable to sleep at night due to night sweats and bouts of terror. In addition, defendant's acts have caused plaintiff to suffer from severe panic attacks and related physical health issues, including high blood pressure, requiring medical treatment of amlodipine. So what's interesting there is if you take this to court and you need it, you're saying your damage, this was caused by the defendant, the court might be able to order an IME and we'll get further poking and prodding. We'll see some expert witnesses come up. And this will have to be substantiated, this claim here. Not only are you actually suffering from PTSD, but was the defendant's actions, was the defendant the proximate cause of this? So that's super interesting. Number 4 that we're going to talk about is a claim of isolation, and there's a bunch of attachments in this filing that show pictures of her doing things during the time she claims that she was isolated from friends, family, including the Spice Girls. But what I thought was really interesting about this part, and maybe it's just, just tea, right? But we get some group text messages from the Spice Girls group chat. So Mel B basically claimed, she had this social isolation that she faced because Belafonte was controlling. She said things like, I know what it's like to be beaten down, I know what it's like to be punched, humiliated, and isolated, and to feel there's no way out except unaliving. And in her book, More Than One, she describes that in general, when you're in a situation like this, you're trapped and you don't have friends and family because you've been isolated due to how your abuser does things. She even made an apology in public, apologizing to fellow Spice Girls for shutting the door on them during a turbulent marriage to Stephen Belafonte. But in the complaint, Stephen says that while Miss Brown leveraged her celebrity status to portray herself as a domestic abuse victim in order to market and sell a memoir laden with egregious lies, in private, Miss Brown bluntly admits that charity doesn't pay the bills and that her true intentions are to leverage her charitable appeal for further sales, celebrity, and opportunity. And circling this back to the claim that she pushed away and isolated herself away from her Spice Girls friends, Stephen asks, or could it have just been disdain? Because she didn't want to go to a charity reunion that the Spice Girls were doing together. So here are text conversations from the Spice Girls reproduced, demonstrating Miss Brown's apparent disdain towards charity work. In the blue, you have Mel saying charity doesn't pay bills. And then someone here on the left says, I hope nobody ever hacks your texts. I believe we should do something good, and kicking off with a charity gig would be hugely positive. The power of our brand is enormous, and all our work is off the back of it, including Vicky. We will get something sorted. I have no doubt, XXX. Back to the breast pump. And then blue, Melanie says, why? My texts are fine. To me, anyways, so no need to worry. Like I said, charity doesn't pay the bills. Everyone knows that. N-O''S for knows. Anyways, happy Friday, XX. Keep me posted on anyone's touring ideas. So the argument here is that she was invited potentially to do some charity fundraising reunion with her group, the Spice Girls. But she responded to it with some sort of disdain for the idea of doing charity work and wanted, at the very least, other suggestions for touring ideas. And really what was especially interesting to me about it is that while charity can involve a cost, such as, volunteering your time, you're giving up that time, or you're donating some financial sum. You're giving that money away. A lot of nonprofit work can actually generate revenue directly or indirectly. You know, it's possible that Mel B is getting paid for certain speaking engagements or the interviews that she's doing. And then she also has a book that she's selling that she released not just once, but she also re-released this year in 2024 and has done more interviews around the time of the release, as if to suggest that she wants to promote and continue to push sales through it. So she's done work as an ambassador for women who've experienced domestic violence. She's done campaigns like this video that we're looking at here, where she's portraying a domestic violence victim. She's even been recognized by the royal family for her work representing women that have experienced domestic violence. So the idea that on one hand Mel B would claim that she was isolated, but she was clearly turning down a charity opportunity with the Spice Girls and instead pushing them to suggest other ideas for touring. And then after the relationship, when she has a book that she's selling and she's doing these interview appearances and perhaps even doing paid speaking engagements, I'm wondering where the switch was flipped on charity paying the bills. And it's making me question the claims of isolation, why she felt the need to apologize to the Spice Girls, for being distant, when we have these text messages here where she's not enthusiastic about a charity fundraiser, even though she suggests that she would be willing to do other types of touring. The difference being what? Now, number 5, or I think we're on number 5, comments that Mel B has made on courtroom transparency. And this was specifically regarding questions that she was asked during an interview with Piers Morgan about the Depp vs. Heard trial that was going on at the same time, again, back in May of 2022. Stephen Belafonte brought this up in his complaint because he's talking about some of the quotes that were made as being defamatory to him. When I pulled up the interview, I really thought it was interesting that Mel B seems to be bothered about the idea of being judged by a transparent trial, by the idea of a court trial being televised. Let's hear what she has to say.
It was really it really made me have like a lump in my throat to think that this is televised, because I know when I went through all my stuff in the US, I actually had to file court papers to have a closed courtroom, because otherwise TMZ were going to be allowed in and all these different outlets and cameras and filming and all that stuff. And luckily the judge granted me for it to be a closed court. So I think it's
incredibly sad.
Now,
why this is so interesting, right? It's very valid to feel like what you're saying, what you have to say to prove your case, to go to a judge and say, hey, someone mistreated me, someone did me wrong, someone committed violent acts against me. It might be humiliating to tell your story. There's privacy concerns. There really are. But on the flip side, when it comes to this situation in particular, Mel B has a book that she's published. She's done countless speaking appearances, interviews. She is an ambassador because of her story, her publicly told story.
It's very squalid and it's very sad, and it's like this awful toxic relationship exploding in public.
And everyone's judging.
Well, everyone's bound to judge, aren't they?
Really
I think
knows
that's
what
it. It's human nature to judge. I don't think you can blame the public or even the media. These two are at each other's throats and they're doing it in public. Everyone's going to have a view. But I agree with you. The moment that crosses into entertainment, then I think it devalues the issue that you've campaigned so courageously for. Mel, I've got to leave it there.
Your entertainment with your tan.
What's it going to do with my tan?
Are you living in LA or are you living here now because you've got your new job?
Look, if you...
And what's interesting in this interview here is she's concerned about being judged, not being believed. She doesn't want camera. She doesn't want sunlight on what she wants to be able to say behind closed doors. But she's also fine telling a certain story her way in public and maintains that it's the truth because she hasn't been sued for it. So when I heard this was very interesting because it doesn't seem to jive with the normal everyday person who hasn't told their story, wanting to build up the strength to finally tell their story, and then having to wonder if it's going to be publicized, it's going to be televised in the courtroom. This is someone who's already told her story on TV and in books. But now it seems like a different factor might be the issue. You add the extra layer of what happened behind closed doors with, the California case, the TRO, the divorce settlement. The judge really ruled favorably for Stephen Belafonte because someone else would be able to be in that courtroom telling their story on a highly visible platform. So what is it that really puts the lump in your throat, Mel B? I'm curious. Now, number 6, the last interesting thing that we're going to talk about in bullet point in this video. Again, go check out that deep dive. There's a lot in there. But Number 6 is this idea, this claim that Mel B has made more than once, and she's maintaining $936. Part of this defamation claim that Stephen's bringing forward is to counter the claim that Belafonte was cutting off her funds, leaving her with no credit cards, no internet, and only $936 in her bank account. In her book, she says, quote, "When I left Stephen, I walked away with nothing but $936 in a bank account, the only one I had access to, and suitcases full of clothes, books, and toys." Now, just as a reminder, when she filed that TRO, technically he had to get out of the residence. So it was him that had to leave first. Even though the judge may have later decided something different as the proceedings move forward, he was the one that actually had to take his suitcase, go out to his car, yada yada. The complaint goes on to say that Miss Brown was not left with $936 upon leaving Mr. Belafonte, as she claims in Brutally Honest and elsewhere, nor was she left without a credit card. Rather, on March 15, 2017, Miss Brown entered into a lease for a luxurious mansion in Beverly Hills, where the monthly rent was $27,000 and the requisite security deposit was $54,000. Now, being able to approve a lease based on past income, that's separate. But if you can put up $54,000, you must have had more than $936. Further, bank statements produced by Miss Brown during divorce proceedings. Now, this is why it's interesting. Because if you're producing this during divorce proceedings, this has been part of litigation, it would be really weird if Stephen Belafonte or any attorney writing this on his behalf would put this in here without it actually being true. But these statements produced by Miss Brown during the divorce proceedings show that she had a 6-figure account balance during this time. Miss Brown was also receiving $25,000 per month in child support from her ex Eddie Murphy, and was in possession of hundreds of thousands of dollars of jewelry, including her $250,000 wedding ring and an $80,000 Rolex watch. Attached as Exhibit 13 is a redacted copy of one of Miss Brown's credit cards, the black card, we got the lease agreement, and bank statements in the name of her corporation, Osiris. But what else do we have? We have deposition testimony from the couple's accountant, Michael Sobelman. I go through all these exhibits in full. But this deposition was really telling, especially a few of the pages of it are directly relevant here. At the top, it starts mid-sentence. It says that you and your members of your staff would only communicate with Melanie because of Stephen's aggressive conduct. The witness, Michael, says no. The accountant says no. So presumably they're asking, was there an indication or is there any reason to believe that you only could communicate with Melanie because of Stephen's aggressive contact? They're saying no, there was that, whatever that was, no. You testified that in 2014 or 15, Mel sent that instruction to you and members of your staff. You can't recall if she copied Mr. Belafonte on it, telling you that she wanted to personally authorize all transactions exceeding $5,000. You remember that, right? I do. Do you recall the Events Locker investment? No. You don't recall that? Not right now. Do you recall an investment in an internet site or application, if you will, to book events one could do online? Maybe vaguely, but it's very vague. If there are any transactions exceeding $5,000 after you received that email from Melanie, would it be fair to say that your firm would not have issued any checks or wire transactions unless you specifically had an email authorization from Melanie? So the accountant says, all I can say is we were trying to do our best. I'm certain we could have missed a few because there's a lot of volume. We would try. And then the lawyer ends up asking, at or about April of 2017, did Melanie instruct you to close Osiris Corporation? Yes. Did she instruct you to separate the parties' finances? Yes. Did she instruct you to open a corporation for her? Yes. And that was the Formel Corp that you opened. It is Formel. Did she provide you with any other instructions with respect to the parties' finances? I don't know. I can't remember very much. Did you manage any of Formel Corp's transactions and business accounts? I don't remember. If we did, it was not a significant amount. There probably was a little bit in the beginning. At any time prior to April 1st of 2017, did Stephen ever instruct you to close Osiris Inc.? Osiris? Yes. No. So Stephen did not instruct this closing. It was Melanie, their corporation. So Melanie called the shots. Did he ever instruct you to separate bank accounts? No. So Melanie called the shots. Did he ever instruct you to open a brand new account for his income and Melanie's income? No. And get this part here. And what I'd like to say is, Formel came about because she was worried that the money was going to disappear. That's what that was done for. She was also worried that she was trying to get money to move out of the house. She was frightened. She told me that. And you believed her? Well, I'm not a doctor or psychologist. I listen to clients. If she says she's frightened, I have to assume she's telling the truth. When Melanie gave you all these instructions in April of 2017, you didn't check with Stephen. You went ahead and followed her instructions, didn't you? We formed for Mel. I just need a yes or no. And then this goes through some back and forth, and he insists that he wants to give an explanation. The witness ends up saying that this is important because I and our staff were truly worried. Maybe she was telling the truth. I'm not a psychologist, but when people say they're worried or they're going to be worried for their children's safety, I'm not going to say, well, let's see if they are. I listened to her. I don't know. So we did go ahead. We knew she was renting a house. We knew she wanted to get out of there. She asked us, and you could tell there was fright in her voice. Do not give a phone number or address to Stephen. I'm not asking you any of that. She was the boss. She instructed you and you followed her instructions. No, she was fearful. She was fearful. Even if she was fearful, did you check with Mr. Belafonte? No, because that might have put her and the kids in harm's way. Whether it was right or wrong, I don't know, but she was fearful. That's my opinion. Wasn't Osiris in both their names? It is in both their names. Didn't you have an equal duty to both parties? As a CPA, weren't they were both your clients, weren't they? Osiris was our client. And individually, you were preparing both of their tax returns. You were handling both their accounts, correct? We resigned, and Stephen knew we were going to resign. I told him we were going to need to resign because of this. We waited a few days, mainly until we got the lay of the land. He knew we were going to resign, that we had to. Did Stephen ever ask you to keep transactions secret from Melanie? I don't recall that. Did Stephen ever ask you to withhold reports from Melanie? I don't recall that. Did Stephen ever ask you to lie about instructions he was giving you? No. Meaning to Melanie? No. And if we look at this deposition in the light most favorable to Miss Brown, it's understandable that someone in fear of their life might try to secure a financial pathway out of the situation that they're in. That's valid if we take the underlying situation at face value for what she's portraying it to be. But how the CPA acted here and whether or not he was acting ethically or violating his fiduciary duty is an interesting question on its own. But Melanie B told him she was scared. He said, I believe what clients tell me. He didn't know, but he felt like if he went and talked to the other party, the other client, that maybe it would put her at risk. So he did what he felt was the morally correct thing to do, even though it probably crossed the lines of his fiduciary duties as a CPA. But on the flip side, he could have been manipulated by a false claim of fear, and as a result, he ended up failing in his fiduciary duties to his clients for a no valid, no good means to an end. But what stands out to me is that this conversation, this deposition, consistently, it's Melanie that's calling the shots. That might be what someone in fear of their life necessarily needs to do to make sure they have enough funds to get out safely. But on the flip side, in the public, in the years since, Melanie B has gone on to claim that he froze out the cards. She didn't have a credit card. She was homeless. She only had $936 to her name because he took all of her money. Maybe she thought pitching it, packaging it in that type of box and putting a bow on it of $936 was a better story that would sell better. And maybe that's true because her book is a bestseller. But it's still undeniably a hit to her credibility to take such egregious creative licensing in the story she's claiming about her financial situation and how her financial situation was caused by Stephen Belafonte directly closing accounts, moving money, and leaving her with nothing, when she was really the one calling the shots, according to the deposition from the accountant in other proceedings. Now, the exhibits also include pictures of the credit card that she had, the lease statement, and, bank transactions with the wire transfers and all of this other stuff. And that all goes to corroborate Stephen's claim that what she was saying isn't true. And personally, this is the claim that I'm most interested in seeing her explain in her response filing. Maybe she has an explanation, a valid explanation for it. But as of right now, I don't understand why someone who was genuinely in fear at the time of and had to, really think strategically and try to get some finances aside to take care of herself and the kids and get out to somewhere safe. I don't understand why you couldn't talk about that truthfully in your books and in your interviews. I don't know where you're pulling this number $936 from, why you're saying someone else locked the accounts, froze the accounts, when you're provably, demonstrably the one who did it. So to close out, those are 6 things I thought were really interesting. That's not exhaustive by any means. It was a long filing, a long document, and there's more layers outside of that document that could come into play with more time. But it's a good idea to remember that most complaints and responses will be one-sided, because any given filing is going to be one party making their arguments against another or in defense of themselves. Also, any exhibits that are included in this filing might not necessarily be admissible at a trial. However, I still think it's fair to conclude that some of the documentation, including in Belafonte's filing, is legitimate because it, was already used in other proceedings, like that deposition testimony we just looked at. However, it's still unclear why we have some of these other things. Like, yeah, we know that we can pull article headlines from the internet. They're still live and published. But what about these text messages? Who are they from? What's the context before and after them? They might be completely legit, but maybe we're missing important context. Maybe someone else was using the person's phone at the time and typing for them. Maybe they aren't legitimate screenshots. I'm not saying they're not, but I'm just saying it's important to consider the possibility of these things. And lastly, this is a defamation case with several causes of action centered around public statements and published works. So while we don't have an official response filing from Mel B, and when we do, I'll cover it, so, like, subscribe, do all the things. This is still a bit unique because there is a lot of access. You can go and look up a lot of things online because Mel B is a public figure, and there's been other litigation before where there's documentation of that. So, similar to Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, we're talking about a long-term celebrity relationship with a tenuous divorce proceeding, and there's simply a lot more publicly available outside of a specific court filing, this complaint here, this single document, because of that, the nature of that, a celebrity relationship that's in the public spotlight. But all in all, I hope you enjoyed this roundup. It did bother me a little bit to see that when I searched the term Stephen Belafonte lawsuit, the headlines all focused on this one point that, he wants $5 million from his ex-wife, Mel B, in this defamation lawsuit that he filed. Normally, when I see other lawsuits in the celebrity space break out, they become big news. Usually one of the juicy details from the complaint is what makes the headline. Like, oh, so-and-so claims that this actually happened. That's usually what makes the headlines. But here, they're in unison talking about this $5 million ask, and they're not including, he said in an interview, that he plans to donate this money. And I went through a few of these, and it's not mentioned in these articles. And I think that's really inconsistent with how reporting on this type of thing is normally done. It seems like the headlines themselves, these outlets, are dismissing this lawsuit editorially as a money grab. So when I opened it myself, I went into it thinking, I'm probably going to think that this is maybe litigation abuse. And I was shocked going through it that I have kind of the opposite conclusion now, and I'm really curious to see her response. If you want to see my deep dive full reaction, I will link to my deep dive video in the description below if you want to go through the full complaint. But other than that, let me know your thoughts. Did you know anything about this relationship? What did you think about the different things pointed out in this recap video? What else do you think is interesting, or what do you expect her to say in her response filing if she makes one? I'll keep covering it if there's a response. We'll make sure we do a video or live stream chat on it. And I'm just ready to know at this point what you guys think. So the floor is yours. You guys take care until next time. Bye-bye.